it's not that people don't know that you want a Crash Bandicoot game, and it's certainly not that Activision doesn't like Crash Bandicoot. It's simply that now is not the right time for Crash Bandicoot. Will he ever come back?
Rumors galore all over the internet and all over the Spyro debate. Spyro HD remake.
Is that confirmed?
Oh my god.
There's no fucking lighting on it.
Visual change, though, I don't feel really adds any tangible benefits to the experience, and in some cases I think it's
Shit, dumb motherfucker.
Who is responsible?
They pay me for this.
Spyro, what up, baby? Bring back childhood, no?
Spyro, 20 years later, an amazing franchise, amazing remaster.
I find that when this rage cannot stay buried in me, that a primal scream is the only satisfying release.
There were moments where I was quite enthusiastic about the Spyro remaster. Loads of good work being put into practice, some fine attention to detail, and a kick-ass crunch to its core controls I wasn't expecting. It's definitely Spyro. Zapow! Whoosh! Bam. I also encountered a lot of, oh no, stuff that drags the experience down and, to nobody's surprise, has me siding with the faded wonder of the originals. Reignited's plucky, but the OGs just feel more complete. That's the TLDR version of the vid. If you didn't like that, then cool, you're free. Go on, run away, please, take me with you. This isn't a smear on Reignited though. Toys for Bob has plenty going for them, and there's room to recognise both sets of trilogies, something I maybe felt more complicated about with Crash. My issues aren't all to do with the developers specifically either. What I hope will become apparent later on is how the project was also affected by publisher constraints. Yeah, them again. Going around commissioning attack drones now, Jesus. Can't blame these guys entirely for that. Can for this though. You goofed. What nostalgia blind objectively false nitpicking are you up to this time, B-Mask? Ooh, I dunno. Let's find out.
Fish people.
Before Reignited, I went through the originals again in full, hoping to get a fresh picture in my mind of Spyro's control, look, and feel. It's hardly my first revisit. I know these games well, maybe, too well, but I thought it would be a good idea to evaluate them in my current hands, looking for possible improvements, or at least ones I want to see. I still think, when compared to anything else on the PS1, the trilogy holds up extremely well. Inhabited lands with a gargantuan amount of content and detail, coated in an absolutely brilliant sense of character and style. Do things frustrate me and not hold up though? Yes. Double yes. Yeah. They can feel a little slippery to control, there's a few bits of tedium, and yeah, graphically it would be nice if things were even more, well, more. Spyro is a game about geography, about exploring inhabited locations with reactive AI, encouraging the player to engage appropriately to earn their rewards. You might notice something out of place, and investigating offers you a cool secret. Or some mad events like, what, okay, well I guess we're doing this now. Is that a sheep? That's a sheep. It's based on enticing our curiosity, so I wouldn't turn down extra detail if that's what a remaster was offering. To my delight, that seemed to be Toys for Bob's main focus from the start, and I thought it was great for their benefit as much as for fans. We've had both ends of the remake spectrum, ones where they've tried to stay exactly the same but beveled and embossed, or ones where they've radically changed entire levels and plot beats to mixed results.
Hashtag Gadgetron.
Spyro straddles that line nicely by keeping all the same layouts, stories and characters, but altering the set dressing and designs enough to make it uniquely worth visiting. It's closer to a reinterpretation than a straight-up remaster, bringing back the old way the games were played but letting the new team have extra creative ownership. I think if you have to do this kind of project, then that's the right way to go. My complaints when it came to Crash mostly fell on how standardized I felt everything had become. A game attempting to emulate hand-drawn cartoons now had realistic shaders and textures, a bit of a misstep in my view. I also felt it was obvious there was no clear artistic direction, as though they just took the models from the originals and slapped on some modern tech without any kind of stylization. It was kinda bland, and while it was fine enough to get through and had some great touches, it didn't really warrant its long-term existence over the originals outside of, hey, remember Crash? Sure do. Toys for Bob's approach has been more clearly defined. They've been been vocal about visual production, maybe encouraged to do so after N-Sane's apparent lack thereof, posting their concept art on Twitter to show their thought process. They took things a step further by hiring a few freelance artists to help redesign the characters, and their lead designer, Nicholas Cole, has a look that just works for Spyro. His style has an intriguing mix of light, impressionistic detail and hard angles, which I believe is the next logical step to reinterpret the in-game graphics of the PS1 titles. It takes their polygonal look, preserving the squared-off edges and strong shapes, but injecting them with more of its decorative fairy tale influences. He and others have been very canny in looking at both old models and promotional material when creating these redesigns, using whatever's useful to achieve functional and familiar forms. The modelers rose to the challenge and adapted Spyro's redesign to look good on screen wherever possible. When compared to Crash, the illustrative approach is much more obvious. His eyes are flatter cartoon textures, so they tend to not be affected by unflattering lighting. His squared edges and features are meant to pick up light and shadow selectively, so it doesn't haphazardly drape over his body, keeping his shape reasonably clear to view while playing. This distinctive style is evident throughout the trilogy, not only applying to the characters but to the level design as well. I was worried some of my favourites would leave me wanting, but I was taken with a lot of the changes, most feeling purposeful. You might have picked up on their effort to make the game's architecture look more organic, structures assembled out of rocks and trees and other foliage wrapping around them. It enhances the lush, busy living space suggested in the originals and embellishes the trilogy in a sensible way, which creates interesting interpretations, perhaps doubling down on the context of a world that might have once seemed vague. It can also breathe new life into places that showed greater potential back in the day, giving you new reasons to stop and soak in the atmosphere. My litmus test was always going to be the Avalar homeworlds. You guys might remember the effect they had on me, and early footage had me going, well, I might give it a shot when the game comes out, I guess, see how I feel. In some cases, I think it's transformed levels I hadn't cared for into something greater. I was very into what they'd done with locations like Artisans, sure, but the way they applied their methodology to Beastmakers, it's effectively a whole new place now, and for the best. Those levels always used to run together in my mind, so the new style mitigates that a lot. The differentiation also brings out the best of the collectible dragon elders in the first game. They now have unique costumes, shapes, and characteristics, so they aren't just a bunch of recolored models anymore. Their animations are well done, and I remember them individually now, which felt way more rewarding. Even left a smile on my face once or twice. How about that? Those character details are genuinely appreciated. They've tried to reinterpret a lot of the cast to give us extra information about them, what they do and their general attitude to life. It's helpful in making the worlds feel populated, along with efforts made to have all NPCs of the same tribe look different from each other, adding new aspects to their level backgrounds, or including special animations for their dialogue to make them feel invested in the moment. I was impressed to see that the enemies and NPCs kept their dynamic interactions, standing alongside new additions like Alora, Hunter and Moneybags now reacting to Spyro's attacks. That small bit of playfulness always having gone a long way in bolstering the game's appeal. This can be further helped by, in some spots, improved characterization, and while on the subject I gotta say that JB Blanc is killing it as Moneybags. I mean it, he's managed to catch everything I liked about both of the previous voice actors and deliver his own brand of pompousness, accompanied by a great redesign. We even see the animal pals he's kidnapped reacting to him. That's pretty funny. His arc over the two games comes across stronger now, as we transition from his aloof, dismissive origins to the nastier, pointed dialogue of 3, which has, I'm happy to say, aged incredibly well.
What? You don't want to pay? What are you saving your money for? Another sequel?
Whenever he opens his mouth, it's a good time. That's a bad sentence. When Reignited implements a strong decision, it pays off in spades, attempting to add to what already worked. This goes from the design principles to the attempt to preserve some of the original's flourishes. I'd been really annoyed at how many simple effects in Crash had been executed quite badly, so was very pleased to see how many of Spyro's were nicely done and on their own terms. Whirlwinds, egg hatchings, the dragon crystals, Bianca's rainbow entrances, the kind of details I'd seen ignored in Insane had been better considered here, even giving the interface of the game a less templated look than I'd initially feared. Remember in Crash when I criticized the water and ice for looking like bad presets, how everybody was saying, oh nitpicker, nobody cares about that, you fool. Hey look, what's that over there? Is that water illustrative? Is that ice like an illustration? Somebody thought that was important to get right, huh? Wow, what a loser. I particularly enjoyed additional technicalities that had been included too. Dynamic music is now a thing. When you enter a fight, charge, go into a building or stand still, the music alters to fit, which worked out better than I expected at multiple moments. It can also be swapped out for the original soundtrack, the kind of option that probably needs to be put in more often. Sparks now visibly droops with each hit, and every time he changes colour, the light on the controller does the same. Then he asked if I like to play Castlevania. It was weird actually. Of course, the crucial part is how it plays, and when exploring the space, my biggest surprise was just how well Spyro controls. I might even say it surpasses the old games. The reason I'm so pleased is that, unlike Crash, it doesn't feel cheap. So often I was making bad jumps in Crash that I knew shouldn't be that difficult before, whereas when it happened to Spyro, the adjustments I had to make were few and far between. I won't say there are no moments that feel unfairly altered in terms of collision detection, but nothing that seemed off compared to my experience with the classics. There's been a lot of thought put into the level of control. You can master it and keep Spyro on target, but with enough margin for error that doesn't feel like it's on rails. This is assisted by some great animations that have Spyro slam into position to register your actions, which were always kind of abrupt back in the day. Tweaks have made everything more fairly manageable, or enticing to make use of. I've never been a big fan of the head bash move, but it's now a lot faster and more satisfying. Spitting and targeting is generally stronger to calculate thanks to the space feeling better realised. A couple of the later games' upgrades have also been retroactively worked into all three titles. Sparks had a seeking out treasure move in the second and third games that now also features in the first, which is super helpful. Likewise, the level warp option from 3 is available across the trilogy, as is the roll move, which can be a great way to move yourself out of a tight situation a charge might not achieve. Same goes for the level maps and, get this, the cheats from 2 and 3. Seriously. Extra modes have been altered too, such as when you take on another character or when you're placed into a vehicle, lessening a couple of headaches. Sergeant Bird's missiles now partially home in on their targets. You still have to put in a little effort, but it's less of a pain to miss. A few forms of transport are tighter to control, the ice skating feels decent, and I'm not just saying that because I was distracted by this handsome fella walking around. Seriously though, should I sue? The best change has been to Agent 9, who now, with the improvement in recent years on the video game shooter formula, benefits from a much smoother, less wonky range of motion. It's one of the great joys of the trilogy, to rediscover things I used to dread and find they've become more fun to play without feeling diluted.
Trouble with the trolley, eh?
Don't act surprised, you knew I was coming back. These are all reasons why Reignited was genuinely engaging to play through, and why I feel pretty good about the team behind it. There's evident thought here, the talent on display is obvious, and if you're here for the morbid curiosity of simply comparing how much has changed, you have so much to explore. This could mark a strong future for Toys for Bob, and indeed the Spyro franchise at large. But not quite.
Sorry.
While there's lots of good things, more than I thought there would be, it's often let down by one word that affects everything I mentioned. Inconsistency. With one hand the game giveth, and with another it taketh away, and it's the fact it giveth so goodeth that maketh the bad thing so baddeth. It's okay, I'm done. It was disappointing to see such good work affected, and I began to suspect as the games went on that maybe the later games had been made in some haste. Spyro 1, with a couple of small exceptions, is pretty on point as the most polished remaster of the bunch. 2 was where I started to feel things slipping, and 3, well, I don't want to be rude, but I might have to be. I was still able to complete the games fully, but that doesn't mean that this feels like a totally finished product. Not at all. For a start, while the core controls feel good, which makes the majority of Spyro 1 play well, the specialised missions that make up most of 2 and 3 feel less dependable, and their difficulty has altered significantly. Some of what's gotten easier you can put down to a superior degree of control. Certain precision-based missions and all the speedways feel as challenging as before, if a little sharper in motion. Others are laughably simple now. I found myself facing tasks I still find tough and completing them with an embarrassing lack of effort, or turning what were once quite intensive moments such as the Gear Grinder Thief Hunt into a stripped-down affair. I've heard a lot of people are up and down on the skateboarding, and while I thought those sections were easier, the rocket boarding... yeah, probably shouldn't be this frustrating. The worst is when you feel you've exploited your way through a section you were never able to cheat before. Yeti boxing, almost uncheesable once, is a joke now. I shouldn't really be able to do this. Speaking of, the animal pals were 50-50. I loved Agent 9 sections, but was gutted at how bad Sheila feels to play, and I do think part of it is down to her redesign. Before she was a very compact character, with a short-handed anatomy that made her easy to track across a level. Now this elongated, complex thing drags along the ground and doesn't seem correctly synced up with the controls. She's just unpleasant to deal with, like most of Australia. Bentley suffers from a similar issue. He's always been cumbersome, but as with Sheila, was made into this compacted square to track comfortably on screen. Now he's got a constant over-the-shoulder view, which seemed to work at first. It was when I entered the Whack-A-Mole challenge it became a 3-act farce. Usually given a wide top-down view and not starting the timer until the arena's been reached, this version begins immediately and has you zoomed in way closer. I literally need eyes in the back of his head to finish this with any kind of skill. Maybe it's just me, I've seen others manage it, but it did not feel good. Same goes for some of the boss fights. 2s are fine enough. In the case of Gulp, there's a couple of slight changes that could go either way for you, making good often on stealing Spyro's health pickups. Could probably say the same for the bosses in 1, who feel a teensy bit improved thanks to some stronger programming. Then you get to 3's bosses and jeez. They've all been rewired to act as a fixed focal point for the camera, as if Spyro is locked onto them, zoomed out to the point where no sense of size or intensity can be felt anymore. They're also laughably simple. I've always had some fun tussles with Spike or Scorch in the past, but here I breezed through both very quickly. Also, these guys can look jank when they move, clearly tracking faster or slower than their animation has been completed. Pulls me out of the moment a lot. Oh, and yes, there were plenty of glitches. Glitches I've never encountered in any of the PS1 titles. While Sergeant Bird played okay, he ran into so many bugs, like touching the ceiling and being locked into a downward view, or the time I walked into an archway and was assaulted by visions of his time in the Somme. 3 had the most issues, enough to leave me pondering just how quickly this got put together, and I'm mostly bothered because it often hurt the gameplay. My favourite is that the new supercharge build-up is so powerful that all of the thief missions using it in 3 are broken. In each case, I found I was able to catch the egg thieves almost instantly, and in one situation I actually overtook the guy and left him stuck. It didn't seem to mind. While I loved the implementation of dynamic music, that too seems up and down. Maybe it's because the instrumentation isn't as punchy, but there'd be levels I remember feeling very joyous suddenly seeming quite drab. The music having decided to check out because things weren't technically happening. Bit of a pisser in Nasty's loot, given that track is supposed to be quite bombastic, semi-fantastic, to celebrate you getting to the game's free-flying end. People say, well, just use the old music, as if that somehow negates any issues with the new tracks, but even those aren't mixed terribly well with the in-game sounds and loop abruptly. Shame. I think it's disheartening that such things aren't in the game that came out over a decade ago, on limited hardware but clearly with more bespoke programming. Spyroscope, a tool developed to replicate the PS1 title's geometry and assets, has not been able to accurately recreate their reliability, and that has soured a large number of challenges that used to feel fair and fun to conquer. It's not about making the game easier or harder, it's about making it feel finished, and that's something the originals will still have over this remaster. I could forgive it if it felt that the creative decisions I'd already praised made up the difference, but sadly, they're inconsistent too. I really mean it when I say I think Toys for Bob's creative vision was good, and that's why it's frustrating when it doesn't always stick. Sometimes there are things that seem rushed or made with a completely different style in mind, and other times it feels badly interpreted. I grant that's a very contentious argument and you're free to enjoy those changes, but for me they alter the personality of the series in ways that reduce its appeal. For all the new polish, some small luxuries are gone. You'll notice as soon as you boot up the game you get basic menus, replacing the full introduction sequences and guidebooks of yore. It's weird because they make a point of the guidebook in the second game's story, which is now just an unremarkable menu screen. Considering N-Sane dealt with this to tie the trilogy together, a new design for these guidebooks would have been greatly welcomed. All of those extra bits of animation and character details I said they kept are also intermittently missing. And when you notice it, it can feel akin to a one step forward, two back kind of deal. I don't need to be able to shoot the bunnies into space, but I want to. Other times, it's bigger stuff. While some levels look wonderful, some don't. Spyro has always been careful with its colours, and an article that I know these guys must have read documents the deliberate theory Insomniac explored. Colours were impressionistic, apparent through their exaggerated temperatures, such as the dark purple mountains of Skilos Badlands, or the cocktail-coloured skies of Idle Springs. Suggestions of light and shadow were baked into the game's textures rather than relying solely on the engine, so that, like a painting, lighting is simulated by colour, and while there is a simple palette, it would strongly contrast between characters and their environments. These techniques put extra power in the hands of the artists, so that shape and colour are always clear for the player to read. Reignited has tried to put that into practice, and mostly did a good job, but sometimes the palette choices feel lesser, and occasionally you'll see it resort to a lot of effects I criticised Crash for, like bloom lighting and colour filters that overwhelm an image, making individual pieces harder to pass. The sun bleaching effect in Peacekeepers is more realistic, but also more overwhelming than the Waterloo grit of the original, while next door, Clifftown at least attempted to capture the same impressionism through coloured shadows. Sometimes the skyboxes feel too literal. Occasionally they nail the ethereal, painterly quality in their own way, but when they're super literal, it looks like we're in Andy's bedroom. Some engine effects can impact my travelling through a level comfortably, including the dreaded motion blur, which is still the most needless requirement I've seen pushed onto platformers. I don't know why it started, I don't know why it hasn't gone away. I found swimming irritating because of the effects and filters chosen, obscuring a lot of the points of interaction. I understand, you want to simulate actually being underwater, but this is a cartoon, you can clear it up a bit. Aquaria Towers used to be such a cool looking, colourful utopia, now it's a murky 20,000 Leagues piece better suited to an action game in a realistic style. Sometimes I just felt colour was badly reformed, like how Glimmer's once deep blue-purple sky has been lightened and now clashes with the purple of the rooftops, or how Scorch, which once used soothing, clean colours to contrast with the harsh desert, is now all sand-worn and dry like bloody Spec Ops. I'm up for debate on some of these points. I found that my TV's output reflected the classic look of a level like Icy Peak, and I can't tell if that was the intended colour or if my capture was too unsaturated. Official internet footage leads me to believe it might just be horribly coloured, but at least I can confirm that, when it's treated with intensity, it feels truer to that impressionism. I find this important because, as this article states, and I'm slightly paraphrasing, we are very sensitive to colour changes. It is all too easy to get caught up in tile counts and polygon limits, and miss the fact that a level is lifeless or confusing because we failed to show adequate respect for the power of basic artistic concepts. The team is halfway there, but the methods could have done with a more consistent re-examination. It's funny because I found the game's concept art is almost 100% what I was hoping for, but doesn't always reflect the final look. For example, I hated the new Cloud Spires, now feeling sterile against the bright, exciting look of the original. I assumed what they had interpreted as rock formations were once cloud structures, moulded to represent a magical hybrid. Well, it seems the concept artist agreed with me. If you check their drawing, they did indeed intend for the clouds to wrap around the spires, while in the final game they're just rocks. That suggests a disconnect between the modelers and the illustrators. Psst, they're supposed to be bellows, guys. That's not what those are! And yeah, I think that concept art critique goes double for the characters. I gave praise to the angular look of the style, but I don't think everyone has been translated so delicately. On paper, I love the look of Allura and Hunter. Cole's redesigns are spot on, but once modelled, they don't share all the qualities that made Spyro look so good. Sometimes the colour feels sloppily applied compared to the careful blending of the concepts, or the anatomy feels like it's a little too accurate, giving Allura these painfully awkward legs, or Hunter's face, yikes! He's got cartoony proportions, but they're pushing for very clear, almost correct anatomy inside of it. And I don't know, it just pushes him into that uncanny territory. How can I best describe this? We'll look at these variations on a CG Smurf. Don't ask how I got here. First was set in the real world and tried to break their cartoon form to feature realistic aspects. You can see how there's supposed to be a skull in there with the separated eyes and added surface details, and it's just, it feels wrong. Like it's trying to fool me into being real. It's just not gonna fly. Now contrast with the second attempt, closer to the look of the comic illustrations, sacrificing expected anatomical detail to replicate the malleability of the drawing, with flat surfaces that the human eye picks up faster, perfect for energetic cartoons. Lines always read faster than solids to the human eye, so if you make your solids look like lines, you can make them read quicker. A lot of movies are experimenting with how to take illustrative visuals to adapt them to CG, and as with Crash, Spyro is still missing a couple of notes on the subject. There were characters that I think got this right, leaning heavily into their concept art and coming out looking brilliant, and others who just looked like they were either botched in translation or from a completely different game. Sometimes they fall in line with that great angular etch style, and sometimes they're going for typical Disney affectations. And I don't know, it makes me miss the innocent, slapstick, muppety charm of the originals. Sure, we can argue how consistently interpretive those models are too, but artist Oliver Wade's concepts show how close they got, how they're meant to be quite flat and illustrative. We can see how exaggerated their eyes and mouths and features are, and this is all only to the benefit of making them more readable. Look at the Rhinox, who had big features so you could read their expressions, now relegated to these thin heads and awkwardly shaped eyes. I get the idea they were unable to translate the concept art, which was going for these exaggerated horn-shaped skulls that shrank the facial features. And while as per the original they drew up different body shapes for all of them, they ended up using a one-size-fits-all model, which, when resized to small, doesn't read so good. There's a general air of attempting to outthink the OGs that undermines their intentions. I understand some of it. There's been talk of the quote censorship with the splatter guns. Can't say I blame them for not wanting to open that can of worms in their modern kids game, you know? Or Bombo. Well, he's called Bob now. Of course the turban-wearing bomb guy was going to get a redo, though they obviously couldn't settle on a less offensive accent, so they just used them all.
Well, two can play at this bombing game. Let's go.
But then it feels like they undid themselves on occasion. This character, now voiced by a woman,
Wherefore art thou, Romeo?
was originally a man.
Wherefore art thou, Romeo?
I kind of saw it as a their business thing, but I'll live with the change. We'll just ignore this person right here.
My name is Little Bo Peep, and I've lost my cowlicks.
Good to see you two again, honestly. Also felt like it killed a lot of jokes for little benefit. Fracture Hills had this cute gag where the female fawns all spoke with Valley Girl accents.
Poor helpless little me, blah blah blah. Sorry, short stuff. I was only in here because I like the peace and quiet. Anyway,
Well, now they're all Scots, which might reflect the folklore vibe, but killed a funny juxtaposition gag and made it kind of boring. Not to mention that this accent is anything but Scots. You're gonna want to sit down.
Thanks for saving poor helpless little me.
Sorry, short stuff. I was only in here because I like the peace and quiet.
Oh, hello there!
Outside of Moneybags, most of the performances were intrusively bad. There was a lot of scenery chewing and mistranslated characterization that left me feeling they had overthought reinterpreting the content. No idea what they were going for with Ripto. I saw comments talk about how maniacally evil he looks now and how great that is, but I was never under the impression that Ripto saw himself as a mustache-twirling prankster. Ripto came across as a guy who took himself very seriously and was angry at everyone and everything. A little man who thought he was big. He didn't strike me as cunning with any kind of wicked intelligence, so I don't know what this reptile eye shit is supposed to benefit. Reptilian eyes represent a dangerous, vicious quality, traits I don't think Ripto has ever had, compared to these, reptiles from one level who now have normal eyes, okay. The old sensibility comes through in spots, but the rest of the time Greg Berger sounds like he's not sure if he's playing Malice or Slapstick or... you tell me, man.
You singed my cape! Dragon, you are really starting to get on my nerves!
The character's charms often felt muted, including, sadly, Spyro, whose line reads are now much less aggressive. Perhaps not gone completely due to the game's unavoidable contexts, his increased earnestness leaves some of the characterization feeling unfocused. While never deep, there was an urgency about Spyro's attitude in the past, and sometimes it would form a simple character arc. When he and Allura first meet, they're a little standoffish, not sure how to read each other before they become friends.
What are you, some kind of goat?
I'm a fawn, you dork.
Oh, sorry.
Here, no, it's just a bit of playful banter.
What are you, some kind of goat?
I'm a fawn, you dork.
Oh, sorry.
Never get angry, never go off brand. Boy, does that sound familiar. It's really galling when so many of the original cutscenes were already performed so well. Sorceress and Bianca are the worst offenders. Their scenes are painfully one note, the game having released almost a decade ago feeling much more impactful.
I need them for a spell so I can live forever!
Wait a second. A spell?
I need them for a spell so I can live forever! Wait a second. A spell? What did you think I was going to do with all those dragons? Open a zoo?
Still, at least all the in-game dialogue is the same. Wait. So, unlike Crash, they decided to add some dialogue for the Helper Pals. I imagine this was to make them seem more involved in the story, but it's closer to an obnoxious guy in the cinema who won't stop reacting vocally to whatever's going on.
If I had my blaster, you'd be singing a different tune!
Internalize!
Keeps undermining the character who was supposed to be threatening. Not that she wasn't doing enough of that herself. This animation is just all over the shop, especially when compared to the excellent in-game animations for the dragons in the first title. What is happening here? I think there is a step where you can be too clever. Everything is up for interpretation, but you have to be really careful when actions contradict the original intentions completely and render it meaningless. It's what makes the game's storytelling come across as a first run through Google Translate before being put back into English again, and I can only blame that on the direction of the project from the people who worked on it. That is, the many, many different people in many different places. Oh boy. Now, again, I can't really single out Toys for Bob for any of these complaints, because several companies were contracted to help complete the game. Makes sense, I've always said it was a tall order to recreate these. Crash has a small cast of characters, a lot of reused assets, and a linear setup. It's reasonable to assume they could be remastered in a shorter time frame if required. Spyro is way bigger though, stupidly big, not just in level size, but in the variables offered by its non-linearity, and in the huge amount of characters, level types, and extra modes it was packing. Allegedly, this required several studios to come in and help, which is pretty standard when you consider how the movie industry creates features, but not standard when you think of how the first trilogy was conceived. I think a lot of that consistency is always going to be easier to achieve when everything is done in-house by a small team of devs. This is again all speculation, but you could really feel it in the games themselves, 3 apparently having its own dev team who were called... oh... we meet again. It's actually charitable of these guys to jump in and help, and great that they accomplished all of this in the time frame, but it's sad that this was a step that needed to be taken, and I think Activision has a lot to answer for. Well, what else is new? The gratefulness people have shown towards the company for bringing Spyro and Crash back troubles me. Racevic made a great video about their attitude towards, say, Call of Duty. They would produce a game people liked, then pump it out tirelessly until the audience got bored, then engineer a hiatus and better produced return to profit off the nostalgia. It was starting to sound like I'd been through this before. Crash and Spyro didn't disappear just because of bad sales. When Activision grabbed the licenses, they dissolved Crash's studio and encouraged the push towards Skylanders for Spyro. When Crash returned at their choosing much later, making a huge profit, Spyro was very suddenly announced in a 6-month window. Now, it's totally possible this had been in development years earlier, but it seems like the development window for the team was extremely short given the unexpected success of Crash and Reignited's announcement. I had seen a post from an allegedly verified developer who claimed people don't realize how much work there is to do and how tight the deadlines are. That certainly shows. The biggest clue was when the company decided to extend the deadline from September to November, and the nearly 20GB patch that had to be downloaded day one in order to play the full game. I think the deadline move was wise, but I'm somewhat concerned with the reaction some took to the news. Fans who panicked when they saw people denouncing the patch decided to start a hashtag, #IWillSupportSpyro, as a promise to buy the game regardless. How brave. Let's encourage patches so developers continue to get stressful, unrealistic deadlines just so we can get sloppy games earlier. There were stupid claims that came out of this, like how Spyro was so big it couldn't fit on the disc, completely disproven by the way, and that's a sign of desperation that reflects badly on the audience. Some even hit out at those who criticised the lack of cutscene subtitles, which is again not a great look. The fact that the simple action wasn't completed only grows the belief that this was a production pipeline of confused priorities. If you support this, I feel you are being criminally unfair to these developers and players, not to mention people who don't have access to great internet. Way to mock the less economically able, guys. I don't think it's good to set a precedent where we release the game before it's ready and patches will deal with the rest, right? In 10 years from now, when Bel Sharamoth decimates the population and we're left scrambling for relics of our past, our future selves are going to find a first print copy of Reignited, copies of the classic games, and their respective consoles miraculously intact. There'll be no internet, no download patches, so they'll discover a buggy, unpatched disc with half the content locked off. Then they'll play the OGs. They'll turn to each other. This is pretty dope. It might not be obvious if you've forgotten what I said when this started, but I do have respect for the way Reignited tried to accomplish its goals, and I like this better than Insane. The combination of misjudgment and rushed development just has it fall shy of the mark for me to want to go back to it more than once, and honestly, that's a bit of a letdown. I feel the point of a remaster is to say, hey, with our modern technology and supposed improved understanding of why this thing is good, we should be able to improve it, right? Instead, all I see are the things we lost in the transition. Maybe that's why I'm kind of iffy on the whole remaster thing. There's now been a few, all different kinds, and I don't know that they're really proving anything other than what we already knew, that these are fundamentally good games and they sell. All this time, energy, and talent just for me to go, man, I still really like those old ones. And yeah, I don't know how comfortable I am with the concept that this overwrites the personality of the games the most moving forward. Both can exist as examples of the work of the people involved, but on a wider scale, it could be reductive to the legacy of the originals. Rather than proving how well they still work, it proves how far we are from being able to make games of our own that stand alongside them. There's one way you could stop those thoughts though. Just a simple thought, coming closer, let me tell you. Make a new game. Toys for Bob proved to me they can make a Spyro title that feels great to play and good to look at in the broadest context. And, if unshackled from the confines of the past, I see no reason why they shouldn't be allowed to produce a new Spyro game. The funny thing is, that would probably help honour the legacy of the originals better while still moving forward. My pedanticness here has been to another point. When it's not a remaster, I can't make these minute, super close comparisons, and I'm more likely to say, wow, they really nailed the feeling of playing those old games in an abstracted sense, which would feel more impressive. Life is short, and there's only so many times I can run around these rolling fields again, thinking of times gone by with SpaghettiOs and Okie Doke. I want to see Spyro grow and take the next generation to new worlds far beyond the reaches of my failing imagination, to prove to me that he's got it in him to surprise us all, to give us new, unexpected encounters, to link hands with his brothers and finally take that bold first step into a brave new world. Perhaps this will inspire new heroes to take their stead, as these games, knowing they've done their bit, take their final rest, happy to have had a life well lived. Or you could just come back.
Yes, it's terror time again. Oh, you just might die of fright. It's a terrifying time.
Thanks for watching, everyone. If you like this, please feel free to check my other works and consider looking into my Patreon. I have a Discord if you want to come goof with us, and hopefully I'll be back soon. Ish. I'm not sweating, I promise. Seriously, where's Sly 3? This is going to be so dated if someone hears this. You still here? Cool. If there's a Sly remaster, I will not review it. You don't need one. Trilogy's perfect. I refuse.